Hi there. Welcome to this week's episode of the Energy Perspectives podcast. I am your hostess, a CEO of the Guyana Energy Conference and Supply Chain Expo, Kiana Wilberg. On today's episode, we place the spotlight on Guyanese companies that have been true champions of local content. It is therefore my honor to welcome to our program someone who has been on the front lines of championing local content from the beginning. Mr. Nicholas Deygoo-Boyer, Director of the Vreed-en-Hoop Shore Base, Inc., and founder of the Guyana Oil and Gas Support Services, Inc. Sir, welcome to our program. It's an honor to have you here.
Well, thank you, Kiana. The pleasure is mine, and no need to call me. Sir. It's great being here with you. I remember reading your writings at Kaicho, seeing you move across. So it's definitely great to be here with you and have such a conversation.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. I want to jump straight into our program. As I may have hinted in my introduction, you're a man of many hats. And one of them being during my time as a senior journalist covering the oil and gas landscape, you were also the former chairman of the Private Sector Commission. During that time, you were a staunch advocate of local content protections, and you still are. Now, during that period of time when you held that position, what are your thoughts of the ideals you held for this country on local content? And what's your impression of where Guyana has found itself today?
Sure. So when I was chair of the Private Sector Commission, the industry, while it still is and could be considered new, it was a lot newer then than it is today. And that was around 2019, 2020. So I think chairing the commission was around 2020 and 2022, 2021. And at that time, we had just started production from Destiny. And they had the other projects now coming into succession. And the key issue we were tackling was the industry's perception was that there was no capacity. Therefore, they wanted the flexibility in their supply chain to source where they could and where they had to. But our perspective was that if we did not get protection, we would not be economically competitive. And we needed the protection in order to build capacity. So it was hugely important for us to continue our lobbying until we got to a point where we felt there were enough protections. Because for us, there are many both countries within CARICOM as well as regionally who have had this industry for longer and have more competitive offers from their private sector to perform certain services. But the thing is, they would be considered competitive as to what was being offered then, but what Guyanese could produce long term and with the right protections, those companies would not be competitive to that because a lot of their services were centered around bringing expatriate workers in for short periods of time and performing whatever services or providing whatever goods were needed and then unwinding that, which is not as, let's say, as economical a model as having a Guyanese workforce provide those services or provide those products. And that was why it was on that belief that we kept lobbying. And luckily, the People's Progressive Party government took what the previous APNU AFC government had done, which was a policy. The People's Progressive Party government took it to a law. And the difference between the two was that a law really put more of a bind on the operator, so ExxonMobil and its consortium, and really push them more than just a gentle nudge, more push them to do local content. And doing local content meant that in their procurement, they started to consider and really lift the profiles of local companies. So in ours, when they're looking at who can perform these services, they gave more weight. Is there a local company, or is there a local partnership or joint venture that can supply these goods or services?
Now, when you sat at the helm of that business advocacy body and the arguments that were being made for local content, and when you look at where Guyana is today, do you feel a sense of pride? How do you feel about the role you
Right.
would have played in ensuring that this is now our reality?
Well, it definitely feel a sense of pride, but I don't think, to be honest with you, it's not until we sit in these sort of conversations with some people, you stop and pat yourself on the back. It's more a case where we wanted the ability to get a ticket to the dance, so to speak, right?
Mhm.
And we finally got a chance to get the ticket. But the ticket is just saying, great, you're in the dance. You still have to perfect the business, the service, whatever it is that you are actually providing to the industry. And that is always based on constant improvement. So it's a very dynamic industry, and it's a very dynamic opportunity. So it is always a function of that continuous improvement. So from our perspective, it's a case where, like, for instance, with the company I started, Guyana Oil and Gas Support Services, yes, we went from being way out of the procurement chain to now being within. But even now that we're within, we still have to be competitive, and we still do win or lose jobs by how competitive we are. And it means that we have to constantly evolve. So it's a thing where it is, and even if you look at the law itself, the law also only protected 40 areas. And we accepted that and understood that because of our capacity at the time. We as a people and as a country are still continuously evolving. So there are more areas now that we can offer goods and services in than just those 40. Hence why, there are discussions with government and various stakeholders to expand the scope of the products and services that are protected under the law, because they recognize that the country and its people are constantly evolving. So it's something where I say, yes, we're very proud that we achieved it, but it's not really something where you stop, to say, hey, we're done. It's a kind of, okay, we got to the first mile marker, or we got into the dance, but now that we're in the dance, we need to learn how to dance. We need to see if we can now adapt the music to ourselves.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting perspective there. And it brings me to another important point in our discussion, and that is the effectiveness of the local content legislation since it was
Mhm.
enacted in December 2021. Now, as we noted earlier, the law provides protections for Guyanese across 40
Right.
different categories of work, and to varying degrees. There are different targets that companies would have to meet. Now, in your view, what I actually heard from you a little bit is that, are you of the view that we have outgrown the 40 categories of work?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, do you think the law has worked to our strategic advantage in doing some of the things you noted there, helping us to accelerate the capacity building to understand the industry and to be competitive in the industry?
Yeah. So I think the law has certainly helped. And so when we were advocating for the law, one of the key pushbacks from the operator was that, well, if you put in this law, what is going to happen is you're going to get fronting. And fronting is a phenomenon where you have really strong legitimate partnerships or joint ventures where, foreign companies, and what we're looking at is really complex services, not the basic service. Because the services that Guyanese can do, we can do, and we don't really need a lot of assistance in performing those services. But you have services what I consider in the middle of complexity and very complex, where we have found foreign partners, and in finding those foreign partners, you'll find you can probably split them into two types or two flavors. You have those who have found real legitimate partnerships where it is a real co-opting of resources and, let's say, work efforts to produce a good or a service. Or you have more the fronting or the sham partnerships, which the foreign partners are really doing all of the work, and the local is only just doing enough and earning essentially a commission. And the difference between the two is how much of the value created by the partnerships is retained in country. Because if you have a sham partnership, not a lot of that value is actually retained in country. So what is really just retained is the commission being earned by the person who is essentially renting their citizenship. And that this is something that the operator had always said, well, if you put in this is what's going to happen. The thing is we knew, and I'm teeing up a second half of the answer, because the first half of the answer is I'm happy with what the law has done for us, because coming from where we came from, which was you will never, you cannot, there is no capacity, these sorts of phrases when saying, well, can we participate in the supply chain? And when you're coming from that perspective, well, you just want to get in.
Mm-hmm.
Now that we have a law in place and it's protected for the areas, and we're in these areas, it's a case where now we want to expand. And so before there was a law in place, we had to do and we had to get what we needed to get in place. Now that there's a law in place, now we need to adapt and refine to the situation that has happened. And indeed, one of the new criticisms of the law, or the two main criticisms that I hear when I talk to people about this, is one, fronting is a real issue, and two, we need to expand the 40 areas. And those are the two criticisms I've heard. And I do agree that there are fair criticisms of what is in place, and indeed we need to lobby and advocate to amend, expand, and work with what we see as the capacity of the country today versus when the law had come in. But I don't think we should be criticizing the efforts of getting the law in place, because some of the people criticizing either have forgotten or did not understand and were not part of the industry when it was really, when there were essentially very high barriers to overcome just to get in. So that's why I'm happy that there's a law in place. I'm happy that we got what we got, but it's continuous improvement. So we need to now adapt and figure out how do we improve so that we mitigate or reduce fronting, and so that we expand the protection in areas that Guyanese have now gone to, because you find Guyanese businesses in and above those 40 areas that are protected.
You mentioned a very important challenge, and that pertains to fronting. And it comes to your earlier point that many Guyanese or stakeholders within the Guyanese business community, they're coming from that standpoint where it was you can't, or you don't have the capacity. Now they have a law that says you must give first preference to Guyanese in these areas. How do you see that now being used as a platform by many Guyanese to say, well, listen, I need to partner, for example, with company X. I don't have the experience. I don't have the technical capacity. I don't have the assets. So how about I join forces with this company and, as you noted, collect a commission? What do you say to Guyanese who find themselves between that rock and a hard place?
So that's a very good setup for the question, because the key that I would like to separate is I don't define or look at fronting in a very just simple, singular, you're either fronting or you're not way. The first thing I look at is, okay, is it an area where there are other Guyanese companies in? And is it an area where if you have multiple Guyanese companies, you have some that may have traditionally been in the area, some that might be new to the area, but you can definitely tell there's been investment by those companies from both sides, or whether it is monetarily from both sides, or one side with monetary, one side with sweat equity. And the key is that if you have existing Guyanese entities and you have fronting, it is definitely going to hurt because you already have entities who have invested. If it's new areas where it is extremely technologically advanced, there are no actual real other companies of Guyanese origin who are competing in the area. I would honestly say that I'm not so, okay, well, this is fronting, this is bad, but it's more looking at the areas where you do have legitimate capacity. And with that legitimate capacity are actually hurting the country by fronting. And what do I mean by hurting the country? It goes back to in-country spending and what is left over after that in-country spending, and then what is being taken out. Because at the end of the day, if you have fronting, quote unquote, or you have, let's say, a sort of agency at something that is really highly, let's say technologically advanced, and we have no competition from it, then the other alternative for the operator was a completely foreign entity. So there was going to be zero value retained in country anyways, right?
Got you.
So I don't see that as a pain point. But where you do have in-country capacity and you have that fronting happening, that means another player who has either fixed investment, an office space, a workshop, a distribution network of trucks, employees, they're going to be hurt. And even if you have Guyanese ownership, that owner would have spent his earnings from that partnership here. When you have that fronting, only the commission is left. The only thing that is going to stay here is that commission. And so I look at it as, okay, is fronting, something that's hugely negative? Well, it depends which area, which good or which services, and who the competition. Because the real key question is, what are we retaining in country? And if it hurts what we can retain in country, yes, it's very bad. And we need to look at those areas and figure out how do we either redefine what is a Guyanese company or put rules around or penalties in for fronting. If it's areas where there just really is no existing competition and the other alternatives for the operator was an entirely foreign set of entities, so there's going to be very little or no value retained in country otherwise, then what are we stopping or what are we saying no to?
I totally understand your point there, Nick, and thank you so much for that perspective. Now, I want to pivot to a very important project in which you're part of. You're the director of the Vreed-en-Hoop Shore Base, Inc. I want to give you the opportunity to share with our audience some insights on the anatomy and the significance of this world-class undertaking that is a first for Guyana.
Thank you. Well, so the Vreed-en-Hoop Shore Base, as everyone knows and understands it, is essentially a man-made island that has been reclaimed using sand that we mined out at the sea. And we used it to create, at the time what was on plan was a 44-acre island for ExxonMobil and for them to particularly use as what they call a surf base, so SURF, subsea umbilical risers and flow lines. And that is just all the equipment that goes on the seabed to essentially produce the oil. So it's everything that is on the seafloor. And what Exxon is using that base, once built, is to store the equipment and then manipulate it to assemble it and then send it offshore to be installed on the seafloor. Now, we won that contract in about April 22 to start construction. We started delivering parts of the island to Exxon as early as around July 2024. We just in December, and you've seen on our Facebook page, we had President Ali do a very wonderful thing. He came to visit the project, and he had visited just as we completed our final handover. So in actuality, the project has had its final handover as when you consider the 44-acre island that was being purpose-built for ExxonMobil. In reality, the methods we'd use for construction actually allowed us to have what we anticipate to be around a 70-acre island. So we're now working out how do we and what do we do with the additional areas that have been created, and how do we deploy those areas? Because so speaking for and we, I should say, is that how the structure of the project, it is owned by NRG, which is a co-investment by myself from National Hardware, Andron Alfonso from ZRN Investments, and then NRG co-owns with Yandano, who are contractors, but they also made some investments. Now, Andron and I acquired that area and some additional areas based on a plan which we would consider to be the Port of Vreed-en-Hoop. And under the Port of Vreed-en-Hoop project, VESHI we see as just a sub-project. And I've always touted whenever I've spoken publicly about this, is that we see the next phase of this as being investments that can really impact the average Guyanese citizen. Because everywhere we go, people always ask about the project, but and rightly so. They ask generally about the project, and the second question, they may not phrase it exactly as, but how does this directly or indirectly benefit me? And the thing is that, all right, first, VESHI, is assisting Exxon and bringing more of Exxon's value chain onto Guyana shores, because a lot of the work being done on this base was done elsewhere in areas such as Trinidad and Tobago or Houston. That's right. Before. But that is an indirect benefit. The more direct benefit is when we can expand or add additional berths that are not servicing the oil and gas industry, but that are servicing the normal commercial shipping, which would then have a direct impact on the average person. So for us, we are recovering from investing and building VESI, but figuring out how do we take the next steps to get a berth that can actually make an impact on the average Guyanese citizen. Coming back to the VESI project, so we're talking about, let's say, the entire Port of Vreed-en-Hoop plan, but coming back to the VESI sub-project within that, it's that we have finished it. We now have this additional area, and we want to see how can we use that additional area to really assist in Exxon's supply chain. For instance, maybe contractors or even subcontractors could be local companies who needed space that is near to Exxon, but could not or would not be directly in their supply chain. So they may be a tier 2 or a tier 3. So those are things that we're working out now as we continue to move forward.
Nicholas, this is truly a remarkable project that you and your partners have embarked on. And it truly it's a telling story, rather, when you think about the arguments that you started to make for or in the fight for local content back in 2020. Fighting to say, yes, we do have capacity. Yes, we can build capacity. And here you are undertaking a historic project for Guyana that will service the oil and gas industry. What message, that is my takeaway from it.
Sure.
But what message do you think this particular story, this project tells about Guyanese capacity, about the local content successes that are possible, and those who would like to follow in your footsteps?
Sure. Well, first, if I can add a portion that maybe might not be directly related, but first is that the fight for local content definitely was not just myself by myself.
Of course, you were one. You're one of the many soldiers.
It would be it would be remiss of me to speak on the private sector side of things. We've had the president before me of the Chamber of Commerce, which was the Adat Indar, president after me, who was Timothy Tucker. We all worked hard on this. Even at the private sector commission level, Sham Nokta had led the local content committee at the commission, and actually he's picked up back that committee and leads it again today. It has been a culmination of efforts of many people to get there. But let's talk about the messaging. So leaping from that sort of pretext, and for me it was a case where we had gone into many of these meetings and been challenged so many times on when we had the capacity, could we actually do it, that it's a case where a lot of these initiatives we talked about earlier, from Guyana Gas or VESHI, those are really just at one point me just saying, you know what, I've left many meetings sometimes feeling very insulted to the point where I'm willing to put my money where my mouth is, and
well, you did.
and that is the message I would say that I would like to leave for a good portion of the population, and really speaking to the population, let's say first in Region 3, as well as other areas in the country. So you have Region 3, I think now with the government's investment in the training facility in Berbice, you can now say Regions 5 and 6. I don't think they were feeling a lot of love from the industry because it felt so far. I'm sure when I speak to people from there, it felt so far away. Now with projects like the gas to energy and our base, Region 3 is feeling a lot closer to the industry. The key now is for the other areas. The thing is that the industry is still consistently growing. As we're talking right now, Exxon is road showing or I think waiting for approval for their 7th project, and they now have a name for their 8th project.
Long tail. That's right.
And that was something that, I remember the conversations when it was 1 project. Maybe it's 3 projects, maybe it's 5 projects, maybe it's 6 projects. So to see it where it is, it's clear that it's growing. Now, if you look at it, let's first start with labor. An FPSO, the workforce on it is around 200 people, and they're usually on a rotation. So that means in a maybe, let's say, 4 to 6 month period, you need about 400 to 600 people to have 200 workers on board for, over a month and a half, and then they have to be there. They go home, they get their rest and recovery, and another workforce comes in because it's round the clock type activities. So that means that for the average person who is maybe sitting in somewhere in the country, they don't have to feel that far removed, because from a labor force perspective, they can participate. The key is acquiring the right training and upskilling to give them something that makes them valuable to the industry. And then, having them be able to understand where are the channels through which they can bring their available labor, and that might be particularly certified in a particular trade or so, to the industry. So the message I would say first to labor is, don't be disheartened and think about where, and especially now with what the government has done, where they've essentially made tertiary education and training free.
That's right.
So upskill and work towards it, because if you have the goal of being in the industry, it has protections, and you are going to be given an opportunity, if properly certified, to participate. If properly certified doesn't mean the same thing today that it meant 4 or 5 years ago. 4 or 5 years ago, it meant really having costs associated with getting that certification. Today, there is such a drain on labor that we joke within various facets of the industry that we almost have to go to high school to recruit. right?
Wow.
So to labor, I think the future looks bright. To the entrepreneurs who are looking to start businesses or expand their existing businesses into the industry, I would say my message is understand what are the key requirements for providing that good or service to the industry. Leverage networks like the chambers of commerce or other business associations to make the connections you need, and really propel yourself, because that is why we put the law in. As I said, the law is access to the procurement chain, but it's not guaranteed. You still have to do these pieces. But I can say that, then maybe the third message I leave is that for policymakers, for those of us who are in a position to lobby, we are not going to stop, and we have never stopped to say this has been it. It is a constantly evolving thing. Whether you look at it as our capacity, the law protecting our capacity, or where we want to go in the future, is a constantly evolving thing. So my message is that we've not stopped the fight. Whether you want to term it as a fight, whether you want to term it as a negotiation, or whether you want to term it as where we want to go with our industry, because this is our industry, we haven't arrived. Right? We've just begun. Production, as I said, only started in 2019. So we still have a ways to continue to advocate for and to grow into, to really say that a good portion of our industry comes from, or the work is done by, us.
I think that is a powerful and a beautiful message. A series of messages rather to end on. And Nicholas, I just want to say it's been a pleasure to have you on our program to engage in such an enriching discussion on local content and the companies and especially the individuals who have been on the front lines, rather, of ensuring that this is our reality and that we continue to improve ourselves. So thank you once again for participating. To our audience, I want to thank you as well for joining us. Thank you for your time. Be sure to join us next week, same time, same place, where we will bring you more insights from thought leaders here and around the world. Thank you once again.
Thank you for listening to the Guyana Energy Perspectives podcast. Listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcast.